Well, hi everyone. This is Catherine Isabel Jennings for Your Life Matters Wellness, and I am going right into the second part of a two-part series video called "Can a Spiritual Walk Combat and Diffuse the Critical Race Theory?" I'm not going to get into so much the spiritual side on the uptake, because I really want you to grab why we are and how we came about to be who we are. And please sit through the whole video, because I will get to that side, but I think it's important that you understand. I mean, like I got major epiphanies, and it seems like I've been getting super downloads, and I delve more, because when I start like, oh, this could relate to this and that could relate to that, and once you start putting the relationships to one and the other, you get a bigger picture. And that's what good research is coordinating data and having it, history and data mesh and come together and bridge into this awareness that can change us. And I'm taken back, because there's so much out there, and I'm not too sure I can get all of it in this second part video, but I'll do my best, and I will try to drop snippets on you checking, why don't you go in this direction or go into this direction, and I think that will help you grow more. And heck, if you go into a direction that I like, oh, I just touched on this, please tell me and come back and give me some data that I didn't look up, because once I start, holy Moses, there's so much we don't know, and we have to share, and as we share, we bridge. And that's probably one of the key points of this whole video, and you'll see where it comes. Anyway, let's go in there. Okay, so welcome everyone, and if you like my videos, please subscribe. I try to get at least one out a week, and I kind of preface it and share them, please. It's for us to unite and to grow, okay? So here's the deal. I'm going back to the critical theories, and I'm going back to the critical race theory in about as general as I can without going way over both of our heads. And I'm trying to put this to this with enough information so, that makes sense. Okay, so and I did a lot of writing, so I just want you to know. So let's talk about this. I look at the basic, where do the education of the critical race theories come from? And in part one, I gave you a good overview of the critical theories and the history of them, being from Marxism and the Frankfurt School over there in Germany, and just names and dates and stuff, and Angela Davis, who was a protege who won the prestigious Lenin Peace Award, which is a communist award, and I mean, she won it. I don't know what that means. It is prestigious, and it's for non-Soviet communists. So this person brought that, won it, did a lot of research. I commend her on her one thing, that she is a professor in her field. I do not agree with communism or Marxism, but I do appreciate people delving and growing their IQs. Okay, so anyway, it says in education, the critical race theory is an academic movement made up of civil rights scholars and activists in the United States who seek to critically examine the law as it intersects with issues of race and challenge mainstream liberal approaches to racial justice. So that was a definition by Wikipedia that I just got off under 24 hours ago. I don't see this definition correlating to what is going on in our country right now. I see what's going on in our country the races, the critical theories have infiltrated, and a rage-based society is coming up. And you can call it Antifa, you can call it Black Lives Matter, none of which really has something that I recommend, because it disunifies and it brings on hatred. And so I don't see it appealing only to mainstream liberal approaches to racial justice. I see it bombarding everything, whether you have an awareness of what they are all about or not. Your opinions don't matter, and we will go into that. Okay, so the couple of tenets from the critical race theory that I will touch base on are the second one. Well, there are 5 tenets, or major components, but the second one, the idea of an interest, is convergence, and I looked at the word convergence. It's basically enhanced basic knowledge in social studies, science, technology, ultimately understood that society and nature and the world are organically connected. Okay, well, I want to go further than that. There's a lot. I did a lot of research, but here's okay. So the first tenet basically says that all colors, your melanin is important, and I believe that we were born with a purpose, and it doesn't matter what you look like or who you are. You were born with a purpose, and they don't believe that. They don't. The critical race theorists don't believe that. Whether you were taught that you were born with a purpose, or it was enhanced or not enhanced, you were born with a purpose, and we all have an identity. We are human beings that are created individuals, and we have an identity, and we have a purpose. So that being said, let's backtrack to what was going on before Angela Davis brought critical race theory into our world. And I had to do that because I was looking at, all right, back in the Frankfurt School in Germany, which was like in the 1930s or 40s, this is when critical theories came about. That was during World War II. That was the Nazi era. And here's the deal. Marxism and communism don't value human life. And we saw that because 4 million Jewish people were slaughtered. They were put in gas chambers. So the essence of human identity was quelched, and it was taken away, and it was burned. All of these things happened during the World War II. So if you look at that, and you look at somebody like me, or my daughters, or my grandsons, or I don't know, there's several generations that have come about as a result of World War II, and before that too. But during that time, World War II, what happened then? Well, let's get real. In white cultures in Western society, as well as everywhere else on the earth, the trauma came into the home. It came into the home because there were deaths through World War II and the army, in the war. I'm sorry. There were deaths, and because there were deaths, trauma came in, and I would say trauma led itself as a primary filtering system. It led itself probably, I'm sure before World War II, but into the Vietnam War, the Korean War, okay? And during those times, there was a time frame of, 20, 30 years, there weren't coping skills. So people would come home from the war, and what did white males do? They tried to assimilate back into their families. And how did they do that? Let's go to work. Let's go, 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 go. Let's make a buck. Let's take care of the wife. Let's take care of the kids, the little whatever that was. But the whole time, that was the value system that they came from, and it had trauma marked on it. So it was trauma plus the value system of working. And what you also had was women starting to think, well, there's more to my existence than taking care of children, which the traditional way of raising a family, I still highly value it, but I also value career. Okay, what happened was while men were in war, women filled their positions, and they did a very good job filling positions during the war. When their men came back, they didn't have those positions anymore, so they went back and they had a taste of this career life, so they wanted more. So what happened during the 50s and 60s and 70s was this an awakening in the woman, and he had PTSD, probably from the war. He had maybe an injury or maybe loss. He had trauma, and they did not have very good coping skills. And so that plus work pushed him, here, plus her independence. She wanted her independence. It pushed them apart. There were no coping skills that were bringing people together. It was all like FDR's New Deal was for women, which changed into the welfare system. And what you had was him working, and he did the best he could, and he worked, okay? Didn't sit down and communicate. Communication was not something men did. They worked and they went off, and they worked and they went off. And it wasn't a norm. I mean, to get that today, we're still struggling, okay? But the way I see it, and I have several decades on many people here, and I've lived through the 60s, and I do know that what it was like was that whole let's step away from to come back, and you had your own separate identity and you're going like this, okay? And there were no tools to bring this while you were going that. So there's tools that are needed to work, in unison as a team, as a family, and then there's tools that can train you, and there weren't any. And there were tools to talk and to dump the crap, but we didn't have any in the 60s. So, like in my family, what happened in the 50s was we had a death in the family of a baby. And when we had a death in the family, and there were no coping skills, I mean, we had brilliant people. And this is the other thing I want to share. So what happened when Dad went off to work? He came and got the bills paid. Dang it. And he got some material going, dang it, and he did a good job doing all that stuff, but he didn't sit down and talk to his kids and affirm them and see where they were smart or where they could learn something from his skill set. He wasn't like that. My father, by the way, was French, and he just kept everything in. My mother was Polish, and boy, she let everything out. Okay, so we had that whole interaction as well. You throw trauma in there, and you throw in lack of coping skills. Now you throw in the 60s, and this is when it gets interesting, because we have a gal named Angela Davis who excelled in Marxism's critical theories, okay? And she brought this over here, and through academia, she pushed it through to where it intrigued and touched academia, and it also touched probably political realms, okay? And we also had the National Educational Association saying, oh, what's going on here? Now, this is what I want to share that I thought was very intriguing. So you're dealing with people who have dealt with trauma. You're dealing with people who do not have good tools to talk. You're dealing with families. This is all family. You're dealing with families who probably, and I don't want to insult this, but they go to learn in a church setting, and they just learn, and I don't know if it's a social norm or what, but there's no healing that's taking place. There's no healing, and in traditional religion that I came from, you didn't talk about things, even in the church, and then you're supposed to go and share and get healing. Okay, so what you have is this like hodgepodge, and then you got this free love thing going on in the 60s, and you have Angela Davis putting in these things saying, okay, what was the first one? The 5 attributes of critical race theory. One of them is don't engage, because you're going to, if you engage in an issue that a quote white supremacist, which that phrase is just like, where did that come from? In an ideology that we just naturally have privilege or something. I'm trying to tell you what was going on with us, and there was a lot of trauma, and we were watching, and I'm going to go back to the black cultures in a second, because I have to give equal time, because they're both valuable, very, very valuable. But I wanted to share that in the white cultures, you might have had a lot of privilege going to an educational background, but there was a lot of us that didn't, and there was a lot of us that were just as intelligent as those who were going. We just didn't have the bucks, and so there was this, when trauma comes in and motor skills, I have to work, and you don't cope. You don't cope very well. You're going out there and you don't affirm your kids. What do? You say, get that A. Go get that A, and whatever it takes, get that A. And here's what happened while we're striving. The little kids are trying to get the A. There's a lot of discrimination. Okay, there's a lot of, if you're a little cute kid, you had to bust your butt to get that A, because no one took you seriously. They just didn't want to. They didn't want to take you seriously. And I know I ran into that my whole life, okay? And it's not a pity pot. I'm just saying, I busted my butt to get an A. And there also came times where I just learned you don't put an effort in. You don't give a crap. And that's where I believe critical race theory came in, with the attributes of regurgitate what is given to you, regurgitate it to make them feel good, and maybe you'll get your A. Okay, so we're taught to regurgitate. We were taught back then to sit back and be quiet. We were not taught to engage, and because of that, there were some skills that weren't learned. Okay. I will go there in 1 second. I want to go back to my sisters. So my sisters and my brothers, while I'm over here in dealing with dad and mom and the trauma of whatever it was that we dealt with, okay, and I'm growing up that way, I have sisters and brothers that have, I could cry over this. But my sisters and my brothers, they have been raised in an oppressive state, in inner cities, poor living conditions, and let's go way back. Okay, so the whole slavery thing was entrenched in their soul. They were enslaved from Africa. To say that they were just enslaved in America, they were put in slavery situations by their chiefs of their local areas, and the tribal chiefs. And tribal chiefs in Africa sold them to the highest bidder. And that whole slavery thing in Africa was initially a Muslim strain of business that England saw, and as a result, it went there to England, to Europe, and then it came to America. To single out America is just not right. Check out Wilberforce if you want to know more. So what has happened is through the generations we see this oppression, we see these behaviors, and I have to tell you from firsthand experience, I've seen it. I've been to third world countries, and I've been to inner cities, and I've worked with women, and I do see that oppression still staying there, even though people like me was like, sister, you want to come out? Let's go, you got better talent than I do, let's get your butt out there. There are reasons why they're stuck, and a person can't appreciate their house if they don't own it. A person can't appreciate where they live if they didn't choose to be there. And now you have several generations that are entrenched in that. And in addition to that, let's go to FDR. FDR came up with a New Deal. Well, that was because that was all set in motion to help take care of the households of women whose husbands were in war, that came back from war, who were, quote, looking for jobs, but when they just flew the coop. PTSD and no coping skills there. And you have FDR putting in this New Deal, and that later became our Social Security system, as well as our welfare system. And so what you have is, before I go into the welfare system, you have a party that wants to keep black culture suppressed. And a lot of people think it's a Republican Party. I'm sure there's people in the Republican Party that have done this, but for the most part, the Ku Klux Klan was formulated and founded by the Democratic Party to oppress and keep the black cultures at bay. And they were already oppressed. They just drove them into the cities even more and put them like under a lock and key kind of thing, saying, well, we want to help you. We want to help you get strong and whatever and be independent. The whole time they were saying that, they were saying, well, we'll take care of your kids. And there was more incentives for the family to be divided than to be unified. And because they were divided, guess what came in? Now, I don't know the percentage right now, and I hope I'm close to it when I say it to you. But overall, black cultures in America probably account for about, right now, I think it's about 23%. It could be less, okay? Initially, the black cultures back in like the late 50s, they were two parents in a family. And by, I would say, the mid 60s, early 70s, it was down 40%. And right now we probably have about, I'm just throwing it out there. If I'm wrong, please correct me. But we're around 82% of black families coming from one parent, and she or he, but mostly she, is out there plugging away, trying to get an education, trying to get those kids, those latchkey kids, under control, trying to raise them up, probably taking them to church for a few hours. We have social reform and things like that. And you've got this gal who's busting her chops to get her education. I'm melting here. My insides are melting. And trying to push her through. The whole time she's doing that, you got Planned Parenthood who set up shop down the road saying, it's okay, if this happens, we'll help her out and we'll feed the kids, okay? Well, what happened was, yes, she didn't have a daddy in the house to value her little butt growing up into a beautiful woman. She did not have that. She had a hard-working madre. She did. But she had to fend for herself as a latchkey kid for her brothers and sisters, and or he had to fend for himself because he didn't have a father straightening his little butt out and focusing him in and giving him a value and affirming him in the strengths. He didn't have that either. So where'd he go? He went to the streets. She went to the streets, or she went into the arms of a young guy her age, and they got pregnant, and the state paid for that baby. And or if the baby, the state didn't pay for that, she had an abortion. And she had an abortion because 40% of all abortions are on black cultures. Think about that for a second. If that's 40% now, okay, my guess is 40% of 23% of the national, that's a big chunk of percentage of people who lost babies towards abortion, and Planned Parenthood knew this. Okay, so that's what's going on. Okay, you got this gal who's busting her chops. Okay, doing everything she comes, and of course she's feeling oppressed, and of course she's getting pissed off, and of course she's raging, and she probably doesn't have time to see if there is any tools to focus on wellness, mental wellness, and emotional wellness for her, because she's juggling the whole schmear. Okay, and since she's juggling the whole schmear, what happens is she loses it, or she comes together, whatever, one or the other. Okay, thank God for big churches at that time. Okay, but I was giving you the percentages as of today, but I keep going back to the 60s and 70s. Okay, so here's what happens. Martin Luther King comes up. We have Rosa Parks, awesome, standing for her independence and her rights, duly desired and appropriated, and she stood her ground. We got Martin Luther King coming up, civil rights, and he said everyone's equal. Everyone is equal in the eyes of God. He said it. He went after our founding fathers, and he was all about civil rights. Side note, we have civil responsibilities too. No one knows about that. They don't want to know about that. We have civil rights and civil responsibilities. Look at the Bill of Rights. Look at the Bill of Responsibilities. Okay, we do have them from Valley Forge, by the way, Freedom's Foundation. So what you have here is Martin Luther King comes up. Now, what did that do? And I got this information from one of my mentors who used to be on Fox News. She's one of the most intelligent black women I've ever met. I'm not going to tell you her name, but she knows who she is. And, excuse me. Excellent gal. Smarter than a whip. Okay, so she said, all right, so what do you think this whole thing with Martin Luther King did? I probably sparked all kinds of crazy cool stuff. She goes, yes, it did. It got people, black cultures, off their butt into the arts. It got more so than before. It got them in flooding education. They want to get educated. They want to get a doctorate in belief in their beliefs. Across the board, excellence, prevailing excellence across the board. And so these little churches and the big churches had their aspiring missionaries, and they finally had something inside that swelled up and said, I'm going to go back to Africa, and I'm going to go and I'm going to say, it's okay. We love you guys, and it's okay. And do you know what happened? I think it was 45 or 49,000 applications for visas to all of the different countries in Africa were filed, and you had this crux of let's go, because of Martin Luther King. What happened was every single visa was turned down in every single country in Africa. So what do you think that did? That took the aspiring, the gems of the church in their field of sharing the gospel, and it took them and it went like this, and it pushed them back into the ground, and the church said, okay, I'm going to take care of you. So what you had at that point was the rise of big churches who were so self-sustaining. They were so self-sustaining that they had the social department over here to help with the moms and the kids. They had the kid department. They had the whole whatever it was they needed. I know I was a member of a church, a big gospel church in Philadelphia for a couple of years, and they're so efficient. And they even had a school that you could rise up to get your PhD in theology, and it was, phenomenal. And here's what happened, though. You had the excellence above excellence happen, and yet no one would leave the area. No one would leave, say, Philadelphia or Chicago. They were all comfortable. They were comfortable because the structure took care of them. And I remember going in, and I'm like, they said, "Oh, sister, we love you, sister. You're going to bring people in and all this kind of stuff." And I looked at them, I said, "Oh my God, you guys have PhDs in your spirit. You have it. You come with me. We need to get these people who are complacent, who are pew warmers, and I'll go there, and I know why they are now. We need to get them out. Come with me." And they wouldn't release them. And they're still there. And we're talking, one particular church has 70 ministries in one city. It's time for them to be released. And we're talking, the ladies I'm not talking 5 ladies who have PhDs in theology. I'm talking maybe, I'd say 150. Yeah. There's a lot of them. So what's happening? You have that oppression. Now you've got this gal, okay? You have this oppression, and it squished them back into their bellies, and the church said, "I'm going to take care of you." And what do you have? A socialite, a social person named Angela Davis, who's making the rounds in all academia. And everybody's listening to the word racism in a new light, okay? And there's people like me sitting at home wishing we could afford to go to college, and some of us made it there. I made it there, but it took time. It took time, and yeah, it took a big effort in being a single mother, and so we have Angela Davis, and what is she spewing? She's spewing discord because of a color or a melanin. She's spewing discord. And okay, I'm listening to that. Now let's throw in the white boy in there. Okay? Listen to this kid. All right? Listen to this. So I'm going to just throw this in here. And I hope that you guys can get this, okay? You get this kid, all right? I'm trying to think what my brother was like when he was little. They're little craps, okay? They're little craps, and I have to give credit to a friend of mine who lives in Holland, and he has 8 kids, and I was like, what the heck is with our men? All right, I'm gonna go there, right? I said, what the heck is with our men? They are complacent. I don't want to be in charge of the household. I want the guy to have masculinity. I want him to have some, you know what I mean? What's going on? What's going on with them? And how come they're not doing stuff in the church? You know, they're nice, but they're just sitting there. They're nice guys, but they're complacent. And I'm sitting there like, what the heck? And this one guy, finally, I'm having this conversation with 3 women at the university in Kona, Hawaii. And this one guy goes, well, I was listening to you, Kathy. And I said, oh yeah, what do you have to say about this? He goes, listen to me. And I'm going to spin off of his story, okay? He goes, okay, here it goes. When we're little boys, we are taught. What do we want to do? We want to go out there and break that window. We want to go out and bite that little girl's arm. That's just what we want to do. We want to kick dirt in someone's face because that's what we want to do. We just are spontaneous, and we're just going to want to do it, okay? And we don't think before we do anything. We just do it, okay? He goes, so here's what happens. You got this little kid who's kicking dirt in her eyes. Don't you do it. And they're getting reprimanded left and right. And if dad's any dad, he reinforces mom, okay? So this little boy is growing up in this house, and he's learning, to go from this, he's learning elbowing to, and he learns not to say anything. He learns to be complacent and compliant, okay, to get what he needs. Then he goes to school. Because he doesn't have that there, he starts kicking people over the school, okay? And he might bite somebody over there, and he gets called, parents get called in, and he's like, oh, crap. All right? So what my friend said, he goes, year after year, this little boy gets it, he starts being molded, and he regurgitates. He regurgitates what is given to him, if he gives a crap. I know of another side story where this little boy was brilliant at math, and he was so bored, he was grades ahead of, and he started being disruptive in class, and the teacher told the parent wasn't intelligent enough to say, hey, this kid is way beyond, and eventually this kid said, screw it, and he gave up, and he wound up being an addict. The whole time he was probably way over everyone's head in mathematics. So, back to my buddy. He goes, well, okay, so you get little Johnny growing up to be, okay, testosterone growing hormone Johnny, and he's trying to deal with that and that whole value, whatever. And if Johnny isn't Johnny's father isn't home, where does he go with that testosterone? Oh my God. Okay. And if he's I don't know, Jerome in the inner city, black boy, he's going to go somewhere else too. Same thing. Okay. And what happens is over time, he goes into college and he either parties his freaking brain out, okay? Like this kid's dropping something or drinking something, all right? They party, whether it's in college or out of college, it doesn't matter, okay? And they go and he either just barely gets by because he's might be regurgitating something. He doesn't give a rat's butt. Even if he has debt, he doesn't care. He's learned to comply or regurgitate what he feels like it, unless there's a sport involved. Okay, so what happens? He goes into the corporate world. If he is successful and he regurgitates that, gives them what they want, he gets married, gives her what she wants, but he's so tired when he comes home, he sits back and just disconnects. And what my friend said is, from boy to adult, the man grew up and he learned to be compliant and complacent. Okay, so let's backtrack that man into his early 20s when he's in the college area. If he's been complacent or compliant, he's going to have critical race theory, stick 'em, saying that there's something that, because he doesn't know his personal identity, there's something that is innately wrong, because after all, he was trying to conform the whole time. Does this make sense to you? It certainly does to me. It certainly does. So what happens here? Let's look down a little further. I gave you the black foam. I think that I did a decent job like that. All right. So one of the things that critical race theory does is it tells you, I think it's the second or third attribute. It tells you, folks, it tells you do not engage in the conversation of their terminology, white supremacy, because you're feeding into the narrative of racism. What they're basically saying is don't communicate. Okay? In simple words, don't communicate to something that they're pushing. They're pushing the division, that there's an issue narrative, and the whole time, all people want to do is come together and talk. If you're taught not to, first of all, if you're taught to be compliant and not question what you're being taught, you're learning all the way up through to that point where, what if there is somebody who wants to discuss with you? This is what I learned very, very recently. Okay, so there's terminologies out there that appeal to make you feel healthy, okay? And done rightly, you will. But then the same terminology can be very, very toxic, too. So, one of the things that I believe we've innately, we didn't know that we were being taught this, but through our compliance to regurgitate, we learn not to question. We learned, and it's so funny because in one of my college classes, they said, question everything. Yeah, they say that, but to regurgitate it and to form an argument, they don't want that. They, in my college, didn't want that. And I remember saying something, I think it was in my my philosophy class, and I also had it in my psychology class in high school, psychology, and I said, this is so interesting, and I went into this whole thing, and they knew I was going to ace that class because I just was like, whoa, this is really cool, They did not want me to challenge, and I think if you don't challenge your parents, okay, or they don't give you the leeway to challenge, or you don't have a father so that he can help you push that boundary of the challenge in a healthy way, and affirm it, you are getting people who are holding it in, and they don't have the skills to challenge you. And then they get complacent and compliant. And so they don't challenge, and they just like, oh, well, and I've heard this close people to me, they'll get agitated and they'll confront, but then they'll walk away. And I thought, well, that's not addressing an issue, And so what I learned, and it's very, very important, is the art of the debate. You will not hear, let's debate this. And you will not hear it because you know what the art of the debate is? The art of the debate is two things. One, it challenges you to go into that which is not comfortable and learn to communicate who you are in that which you don't know. And the debate will say, I know what I know, and you learn to research what you know even more thoroughly. But what's more important is you learn to research more thoroughly something else that isn't comfortable for you. And when you do that, and you come to the table, and you both are so good at that topic, what happens in its most minimal, you learn something about that other side that you didn't know. And probably learn something about what you know that you didn't know, or you think you know. So I think that's really interesting. If you don't understand the communication skill called the debate, and it's a tool, If you don't understand it, and if you've never been exposed to it, you're not going to know. You're not going to want it at some point in your life. And you're also not going to be interested in that. And I'll go into the spiritual side of this soon. So that whole communication thing is through the debate is a skill to learn how to excel in listening and putting forth your information and listening to someone else's information and bridging the informations. Critical race theory does not want you to do that. Cut and dry. They don't value your opinion. They don't value you as a human being. That's what tribal Marxism is. It does not value your personhood. It values attaining power and diffusing everything. And I put the phrase down. It was really interesting. What Marxism does. I like this. I just have to find it. Oh, goodness. I think this is very cool stuff. Okay, so basically, critical race theory is founded in Marxism. Okay, and it basically devalues you as a human being. It disunifies you, and it dissolves you, and it debases you. And there's no unifying attributes to it. And it will use rage to get that. And I might touch base on that. I've done a bunch of videos on rage and what it looks like. But if you don't have a skill set of bridging, and let's use that debate, tool. Let's use it. Why not? It can't hurt us. Let's sit down, and even if it's heightened, I have to say, and I'm sidetracking, when I was up in the New England states, there's a couple states I lived in, one of the things that I noticed was they're really good talking amongst themselves with stuff that they already know about, and they're very, very good. But if I took those two, those people who are having those talks back and forth, okay, and say, let's go into this area of the country, they would not. They would walk. And I learned that when someone walks, it's avoidance because they don't have a tool. It's avoidance because they chose to avoid. And even the latest one that I saw was, have you ever heard the term, you're crossing my boundaries? A lot of times I've seen that, and it kind of hit me like with a 2x4 in my head, because boundaries are healthy. If you can you have healthy boundaries if you work on yourself and you can go into the situation, stay as long as you can, say, I have to revisit this another time, and come back and go back in, and come back and go back in. Okay, that's healthy boundaries. What toxic boundaries are, or the phrase, using the phrase crossing my boundaries, is start something and don't give that person a time to respond and flee. And that's avoidance because you don't have a tool and you don't know how to address it. That's what that is. And, I really think we should look at these things. Now, how did all of this get in the church? I'm not too sure how it got in, but it's in. Because what you have is a lot of, let's take one gender, okay, for 1 second. Let's take the male gender, and he's trying to fit in. He's trying to fit in, and he goes to church, and he's listening, and he's getting touched by God his way, and he's just sitting there. And the wife is just, over time, she's just getting really ticked off because she doesn't see any fruit or any whatever. And the bottom line is the guy learned to just sit, okay? And he's trying to get into the spiritual stuff. I am not a guy. I don't know how a guy's spirit works, okay? I can only tell you how mine works as a woman. But you do know that complacency in the church, you can see it. I kept saying, Lord, all these freaking pew warmers, all they do is like, just feed me. And I would get so upset, and I have to apologize to men, like my friend that told me the story about men. I have to apologize to men because they learned how to be complacent. They learned how to be compliant. Okay? And they learned that from don't engage, and that's a critical race theory. Yep, attribute. Yeah. And then in church, they get high in the Lord, and they, prayer lives, we don't know. I'm not judging anything. I'm just saying that they learned to be compliant. And I listen to some of these men that are really solid in several areas of their world, and it's pretty cool. And I'm like, boy, that must have taken them some time. But all right, so how do now that we have the awareness of how it came in, all right, could have come in through a generation of trauma that we did not know the tools on how to walk through the trauma, and I can help walk us through trauma if you want me to. It came into compliance, to comply and be complacent. Okay, let's look at this. Let's look at that straight down the barrel of the gun. Let's say, okay, I have been compliant and complacent because I learned to do it. And it is under a theory that does not unify and does not treat me like a person. Okay? And by doing that, we can start going into our personal identity. First of all, we just have to acknowledge that we've been compliant and complacent because we were trained to be that way. We were trained to be. And right after this little segment, I will lead you into some healing. Okay, so everything I shared with you up until this point have to do with our soul and our body, and our body's responses or our behavioral responses. It probably has to do with our soul, basically, is our intellect and our five senses and our emotions, and they feed into our body. Well, we've been striving, like my family, through trauma. They didn't have the tools to deal with trauma, so they said, well, let's make education an issue or an agenda. My mother was always good on agendas, and my father was always smart. But let's make that the goal, okay? And there was no affirming, and we all didn't really get our personal identity. We didn't really know what it was. And the thing of it is we all worked on our IQs at some point or another, and our EQs, I'm not sure, but I know I tried working the best on my emotional quotient. And let's face it, I have a brother who's really good into sports. I have an uncle that's like crazy, successful in sports. And so anytime that you're working on your body or your nutrition part, let's call that your PQ, your physical quotient. We work on our IQ, our intellectual quotient. Maybe we're working on our emotional quotients. Can you entertain the notion that you have a spiritual man and that maybe your spiritual quotient needs to grow? Sure it does. You are a triune being. You are spirit, soul to body. The problem is you've been operating out of two facets of who you are, growing those very well, I might add, but they're limited in their capacity of understanding because you haven't matured or entertained the notion that you have a spirit that maybe that needs to grow, and those become one unit. And the best way to do that, and I can go into why you haven't used your spirit. But basically, in a nutshell, Creator God created you in His image. He is a triune being just as you are, and there was a separation of which you chose, not you, but human nature, human beings chose to use the self come in, and as a result of the self coming in, it disrupted the spirit, and it shut down the spiritual relationship that we had with Creator God, in a nutshell. So you can go use the whole religious venue if you want, but you're just capping yourself, because whenever you use the word religion, you're looking at a man-made word, a system of do's and don'ts, and it really limits itself. There's a phantom attainment issue. If I am good enough, I will, blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't matter which one, and I'm not putting anyone down. I'm just saying that this caps itself because you are filtering a spiritual precept through the intellect. And basically, it doesn't work, because a spiritual man is that of spirit, and the natural man and the intellectual man is soul to body. So the goal is to grow your spirit, and how can you possibly do that? Well, the best way you can is through personal relationship with Creator God. You can't do it any other way, because if you have a personal relationship with your Creator, it's got to be a good one. It can't be a bad one, because that divides. It divides. So there's this book right here. This book called the Bible. This is a great document on history. It's very, very good. There's a gentleman who does the history of the Bible, and he actually goes to the places, and I got to get his name for you guys if you're interested. I just constantly, it's Acts through Revelation, and this guy is on these little cars all throughout, Turkey and Ephesus and Patmos and all those places, and I just love it because he just makes it alive, and you can see the history and how it really is true. So on the spiritual side, I put it like this. I said, let's look at it this way. I said this to my father. I said, Dad, do you know how smart you are? You're so smart. You're one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I said, Dad, you're a scientist. You are just a mathematician, a meteorologist, a NASA person, ballistics person, whatever. I said, Dad, can you, for a second, believe in black holes? Oh, yes. And you believe in quantum theories? Oh, yes. And you believe in infinity? Oh, yes. And you believe that the universes are expanding and contracting at the same time? Oh, yes. I said, okay, so let's look at it from your perspective. Can you believe that something that is infinite is strong enough to make itself finite? And he thought about that for a second, and he goes, wow. Yeah. I said, well, that's who Creator God was. I said, what's the strongest expression of power, of infinite power making itself finite? And I said, wouldn't that be love? The best expression of infinite power, wouldn't that be love? Infinite love. Sure, that would be so cool. So God chose to take infinite God, put it in the human form through a womb of a baby, and call himself Jesus. Now, Jesus is always Jesus. He's got the Son, the part of the triune Godhead and the Creator God. But what's cool is he chose, because of that separation, it grieved him. It still grieves him, because your free will decides, screw this God thing, I don't want to know it, and all that stuff. Well, God, it grieves him. It grieves Creator God, because he made you in his image. Do you grieve? Where did grief come from? Had to come from somewhere. Creator God created you with it. Guess what? He has it too. Okay? So, here you go. Infinite love chose to make itself finite and was birthed with Jesus. Jesus had to come in human form to experience all of our pros and cons, our trials, our excitements, everything. And then he lived a life that was, well, he lived a life that we could attest to and attain just in the relationship. And it was out of love. And then he chose to go and deal with a terrible, terrible death. Why? Because in its worst case scenario, which it was the worst case scenario, it showed all of us unreachable, unattainable self-love. We can't do it for ourselves, and we can't do it for others. He had to do this level of pain and love, sacrifice, so that we could see the reality of who he is and why he came for you, for me. And he chose that. And that's so real. And what's even cooler than that is he conquered that. And I just talked about this. I said, he went through that terrible, 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 terrible death. But he chose to give up his life so that we could all have a spiritual, full, created value in our inner being, with our soul to our body. He chose to bring us back into the fullness of our created being because he loved us and he wanted to have a relationship with us. It's all about love. Nothing else. Nothing else. So, and here's the interesting thing. Jesus was the great communicator. He initiated the questions. He got people to think. He got people to bridge to him. He wasn't afraid to debate anything. He was bridging. He was the great communicator. And that's what he wants you to know about him, is debate. Ask him anything. This Bible, you can have any question answered in this Bible. You can. And it's not just about the Word. It says the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. What does that mean? It means that he was the Word. He lived by this. He lived by this. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Oh my goodness. He knew so much more than I did. Oh my goodness. So, I don't know where you are with all this, with this critical race thing. But I do know that each one can reach one. And we have to know where it came from. And we have to dispel it because it's a theory. Theories are not proven. This man came that we might have life, and more abundantly. More abundantly. And that's what I'm going to share. That you can have life more abundantly, even in trying times where someone's trying to divide and conquer us. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That division and stuff, it doesn't matter. There are those of us that are trying to point you in the direction of a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, spirit to spirit. And if you want that right now, just simply say, hey, I listened to what you said. It makes a lot of logical sense. It's got a history here, critical race theory. This Bible has so much history. It does. It has so much history. There's history. If this is your buff, if this is your history buff, it's got both on both sides. Okay? What I'm pushing you to, I hope I'm pushing you with love, is to entertain the notion that you probably don't have any clue what your spiritual man is like. And that maybe, just maybe, you need that spiritual man to join with Jesus Christ and have that relationship with him in order to deal with all of the crap that's going on. And he will sustain you, and he will guide you, and he will, it's not going to be bells and whistles, but he'll be with you, and he will give you peace in the midst of the storms. And they're not little storms these days. No, they're not. I know what they are. I'm walking in some myself. So, what else? There's so much to say, but I wanted to go to the word of the Lord. I probably would go one more step, just one more. And that is, once you know who you are, you're going to start believing the value and your purpose through his eyes, not through yours, and not with what man's saying out there, that you are not valuable and that you've got this pigmentation and then you're not valuable, or you have black pigmentation and you're not valuable. You're valuable. You are valuable. Once you believe that, you start growing that way, guess what's going to happen? You're going to start treating the other people around you with more value too, because they have value. And a lot of times people will say, I want to show you that I'm valuable. Well, that's rage speaking. Maybe it's time for us to say, okay, you got to bridge to that point. And the only way to bridge that way, to have a heart that's gentle and wise and thoughtful, would be, hey, let's get real here. Do you have a spirit? You're not using your spirit, man. You're not growing that sucker. Let's grow your spiritual man, mature it. The only way to do that is through love. It's not going to happen over here. It's not going to happen through rage. It's not. That's division, and you're going to devalue people around you because you feel devalued yourself. And guess what? You have a purpose, and you are valuable because God created you valuable. Let's go there. For God so loved the world that he sent his only Son, that he who believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. What does that mean? It means that spiritual man joined with this body can grow and mature and be. And then finally that be, it's because of the relationship with Creator God and your spirit. And that's eternal. That's forever. Father, right now, there are people here that are listening. They're probably tired, but I think it was a thorough time.